Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. I hope everybody's having a wonderful day with family and loved ones. And while we are on the topic of Thanksgiving, I wanted to come on live today to share this episode and do this little introduction just because I am so grateful and to express my utmost gratitude for the listeners and everybody that has supported me along this way as we air this last episode as the Kindred Journey Podcast. As I've been mentioning, we are going to be moving the podcast to the Grounded Mama podcast starting next week. It will be the first episode, and I will be doing giveaways every day next week. If you leave a review, you get entered to win one of the giveaways. So again, just to express my token of appreciation and gratitude to everybody who has left a review and supported me along this way. Just be sure to screenshot a picture of your review and to send it to me via email or direct message on social media. I will be sure to put my email in the show notes as well. I wanted to record this as we are traveling, and I am in a playroom right now recording this episode while all the kids in the house are napping. So I'm going to make this short and sweet, but again, I'm just super grateful for all of the wonderful episodes and interviews that I have had along the way with so many amazing women that I have met mostly along my podcasting journey. If it wasn't for me stepping into courage to start this podcast, I wouldn't have ventured paths with other women, other brave, bold, beautiful women that have done the same. And I'm just so grateful. In moving forward, I'm going to be missing the Black Friday hype that everybody's, all the online sales going on tomorrow. But in lieu of Black Friday, for the relaunch of the podcast next week, I'm going to be offering my signature course that is going to be coming up in the new year next week. So I will be offering it at an incredible discount, the lowest it will probably ever be. So I will have more details, maybe come on and do like a bonus episode the week of the launch, just to kind of share some of the things so we're not doing too much at once on one episode next week. I'm very excited. But yeah, I'm going to be offering a course for moms to help them rebalance themselves by regulating their nervous system and to feel more authentically in alignment with themselves. So I'm very excited to be offering this. And again, this is just part of my journey and part of my story and everything that I have, like I said, I'm grateful for this podcast and getting started as the Kindred Journey, but moving forward as the Grounded Mama. And as we dive into this, this podcast episode, I wanted to do a whole month of caregiving and nurturing podcast episodes, but just with, again, moving forward with this new season and this new space that we're stepping into with nervous system regulation for moms and overwhelmed moms. I'm so grateful to end this season as the Kindred Journey with this podcast episode. Leslie Maloney, she is the podcast host of Meaning and Moxie After 50, and she is going to share her story about caregiving and finding courage through caregiving for her late mother. And I was just so grateful to meet Leslie in the podcasting course that I had taken to get my podcast originated and started. And not only is Leslie a daughter, but she's a caregiver, a mother, an author, a teacher, and just kind of a all-around guidance person in life that I would love to have in my inner circle as far as the wisdom and the experiences that she has led through life with. She has a book that she wrote for kids, and it's Words of Wisdom When You Are Leaving the Nest. And I cannot wait to check that out. I have littles still, so there's a long time before that happens in my house. She really dives into denial about her mom's memory kind of fading. And this is where we go in the episode and what it is like to truly step in to courage as a caregiver. When you have a parent that is aging, I think it's a dynamic that it's kind of a dance that you have to figure out yourself of how much do you step in and when to stay back, because it's almost backwards as far as when you're raising kids, you're trying to teach them to be independent, versus with caregiving for parents, it's more of a rewind or a backwards take from being independent. So she really goes into that experience and how she navigated that as caregiving for her mom. She talks about how releasing control was really hard, and to see her mom having to let go of that control as far as her independence went, and kind of having to backstep a little bit. And, she shared how she was just a small part of her mom's journey. It was a blip in her whole entire life, and that she was so grateful to be there and to stand there as that person to help her forward as the rest of her life unfolded. And she did share that there were certain aspects of their relationship that got easier with her mom's dementia, and there was a back and forth role and relationship that unfolded between her and her mom, where resentment came in as being a caretaker. She said, not to be afraid to speak up to medical staff when you don't agree, and to be an advocate for as the caregiver, to be an advocate for who you're giving for and caregiving to, especially if they are in a home or a hospice situation, whatever that looks like. Again, it was just a great episode. Especially she was expressed how she did the best she could with considering all the circumstances. And I think that's something maybe we can all take in a little bit, because we maybe sometimes don't give ourselves enough grace when we're in something that's really hard, that we are truly doing the best that we can with the circumstances that are dealt or given to us, and how sometimes, the resentment can really get elevated when your life is completely disrupted. So this is truly sacred ground, and that you can't get these moments back. So the best advice she gave was to practice who you want to be and who you want to show up as, because again, when you're in the moment and everything is heightened, sometimes we don't show up as our best versions of ourselves. But showing up is so much of all that you need to do, and to just be there and to be present and to actually not do anything, to just be there is sometimes all you need to do. So please help me in welcoming Leslie Maloney to the podcast and her story of finding courage through caregiving. Welcome to the Kindred Journey Podcast, the podcast where women share their experiences of stepping into courage when comfort is no longer an option. This is the podcast for connecting in community with women who have been shaped by the liberating to challenging seasons that life endures. I am your host, Leslie. I am a wife, mother, daughter, sister, and friend. I too have experienced these seasons in life, and I want you to know that you are surrounded by a community of courageous, real women here for you. I can't wait to connect, so grab your favorite beverage and join me on this kindred journey. Hi, Leslie. How are you today?
I am doing really well. Thank you for having me.
Oh, well, thank you for being here. I feel like this is a little bit of a long time coming. We've tried to connect a few times through holidays and sick season and all the things. So I'm really glad that we finally get to sit down and connect.
Yes, the busyness of life. You fit it in where you can.
Exactly. That's just life. Like you said, I like that. Well, I've had the opportunity to get to know you a little bit, but maybe you could share with the listeners a little introduction about yourself.
Sure. Well, I live in Florida. We were just talking about Florida, so it's nice. This is really our nice time of the year. I live on the East Coast in Central Florida, in a little tiny surf beach town called Melbourne Beach. And I've been married almost 40 years. We just celebrated our 39th. So yes, been a long time married to my college sweetheart. We've raised 2 kids. and so proud of just our family. And, we've had our ups and downs, and just, I mean, it's just the foundation of my life. So, um, I'll start with that, because a lot of times I start with my career, and I
Mm,
thought, wait a minute, let me just start with this. So,
yes.
but as far as my career goes, I've been a long time educator, taught all different levels, but predominantly I taught high school for 22 years in the public school system, mostly juniors and seniors. And the last 12-ish years, I've taught a couple classes for our local state college, Eastern Florida State College. So, and I still do that on the side. It's online, so it's really flexible for me. So I've been out of the traditional classroom since 2013,
Okay.
and just always been an educator, kind of taught everything in the social studies, but really settled in sociology, psychology was sort of my background. And but I teach yoga. I have one class a week that I teach yoga, so I keep my hand in that. I've been doing that for a while. And then I became an author in 2013. I wrote a book called Things to Remember as You Fly from the Nest,
Mm.
and it was all the conversations that I was having with my students as they were leaving the nest and they were graduating and things like that, and my own kids and other family members and their friends and so on. And so I found that I was saying a lot of the same words of wisdom, if you will, in those conversations. And I thought I should write this down and I should
Mm.
turn this into a book someday. So I finally did, and so that was kind of a fun, creative thing to delve into that world, the author world. And then I wrote two children's books after that, that deal with sort of Florida issues and our beaches and our sea life and so on. And so that's kind of another side of me that's developed in the last 10 years or so. And I play in there, like I do school visits and such, and certain shows and so on. And in fact, I'm just getting ready to do one in a week or two, where I'll go all day and interact with the kids and have fun with that. So that's really just a little bit about me. I'm trying to think. And then, of course, I've entered this podcasting world recently, and that's a whole new endeavor, creative and fun, and just learning a lot.
Yes. Well, that is how we connected, and sounds like you have worn many hats over the years, and that was fun getting to know a little bit more about you. And it sounds like you have lots of words of wisdom and words of courage, I'm sure, through all of your endeavors. Maybe you can share also what your podcast name is for others to
Oh,
listen.
sure. And I think we all have words of wisdom to share.
Mhm.
And it's sharing it. I think it's really
Mhm.
important for all of us to find our voice. But my podcast is called Meaning in Moxie After 50. And so it's just what the title implies, that it's finding the meaning, but finding the moxie, finding the spiciness, finding the grit, the courage, and all those things that make life interesting.
Mhm.
And so sort of aiming it at that second chapter, so to speak.
Yes. Well, I'm so excited to, I just launched last week, so I'm excited to listen and learn from some wonderful women. Sounds like you have some awesome guests that you've interviewed and have lined up. So I'm looking
Mm-hmm.
forward to learning some words of wisdom being shared by wiser women, maybe than myself, or what I have yet to learn.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's
Um,
just I learn all the time. I mean, it's just we're teaching each other, and we're just all, as Ram Dass says, we're all just trying to walk each other home.
mhm, absolutely. Well, thank you, Leslie, for that introduction. And maybe if you could, but I guess before we get started, I want to note that this is a safe place for you to share your story. So everything that you say here is honored and respected. So please feel free to speak freely. And thank you for having the courage to come on here and share your story.
Sure.
If there is one that sticks out specifically, or that you would like to share, a season or a moment of courage that you have had in your life, or seasons where
courage, you had to step into courage when comfort was no longer an option.
I was thinking about that as I was getting ready for this podcast, because I think we have many of those in our lives. And the one that really came up for me was with my mom. My mom passed in 2017, and she was 93 when she passed. And the last few years of her life, she started to develop dementia. And it wasn't full blown, but it was one of those things that, I could see it building. And so I was the main, she lived in the same town as we did. So my siblings were not in town. So I was the one that it was mostly falling on to make those decisions. And my sister had already passed, but my brothers were very supportive, but they weren't here dealing with the day in and day out. And so the thing about it for me was there's a denial at first that it's happening. And and so that was kind of in the beginning stages. She had some surgeries, and I still, to this day, I do blame some of what I think was the development of the dementia. I do blame that on some of the anesthesia, because she was exposed to a lot of anesthesia over the course of several she'd had hips replaced and so on and so forth. And so initially I was sort of like, well, it's probably just the anesthesia and she's going to move out of that, and trying to support her in these little, at first, what you're seeing is things that she's missing, or just little subtle things. And then also the denial in myself, because I didn't want to see it. And I wanted to keep her feeling as independent as possible for as long as possible, because I think we all want that. And she certainly did. And then, I don't know how long that lasted, because some days are better than others. And so you would see little things happen where forgetfulness, or we'll just call it that. And then other days she'd be right there 100%. So that was really a challenge. And then also there would be days where she might even be a little more difficult. And so what's really going on here? And it took me a while, because it was sort of a moving target. It wasn't every single day, and it wasn't a clear decline kind of thing. It kind of moved around. So as things progressed, I had to make some decisions, because she was digging in. She lived fairly close to us, 5 minutes away, but she wanted to stay in her house and all that kind of stuff. And was not, maybe she was in denial, I don't know, or she just couldn't see it. I can't speak for where she was at, but there were just some really hard decisions that we had to make. And my husband was right there with me, supporting me, about moving her out of her house, because we didn't feel like, it was appropriate anymore for her to be living independently. And now she's about 90 at this point, 90, 91. So I feel good about that part, that she was able to age in her own home for that long. But it was difficult, because I think when you have a parent that is aging and you have something like this happen, you're always, and even if you don't have dementia enter into it, but you're always trying to balance, how much do I step in? How much do I step back? And how much do I step in? And it's true when you're a parent too, with children. And then you find yourself in the same position a lot of times later on with your own parents. And so, I was really trying, as I mentioned, trying to empower her as much as possible, trying to hang back. And then at the same time, oh man, I got to step in, and not wanting to step in, and have to really kind of start calling some shots. So that was the one that really, and no, it's like, if I don't do it, who else is going to do it? I have to do it. So when you talk about those moments of courage, when you want to run away and you just want to say, no, 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 not me, kind of thing. And you realize this is on me, like it or not, I'm the one here. And this has got to be done.
That's,
So that's what came up.
yeah, that's something I think that you shared is when the parallel between being a parent, the role as a parent and the role as a child, when you have aging parents and when you have children, and learning boundaries with children or discipline, or when do I step in as a parent, it looks probably, it's a very similar circumstance, but it probably looks very different on both ends of the spectrum. That, I think that was something very interesting that you shared. And, you know, finding those moments of courage when you didn't really want to step up to the plate, or because some, in a lot of circumstances, we like to have control, or we like to think we do. But that seems like one of the ones where you were like, I don't want it. I'm putting my hands up. So
No.
maybe you could share a little bit about, and I'm sure your husband might have been, or who is a sounding board for you in making those decisions. Because if your mom did have dementia, sometimes having feedback in those heavy weighted decisions is difficult. You feel a little lost, maybe. I don't know what your experience was like, but maybe you could touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, my husband was super supportive and just a major sounding board in this continually. And I know there were times when he was kind of like, okay, here we go. And it just, he really held space for me and just recognized that I had to talk through things. And, I had some friends too, who were also going, one in particular, who was also going through a similar thing with her mom. And she was a real blessing to me because she was several steps down the road and in some of that decision making, and so she really helped guide me. But yeah, I mean, it's a position you find yourself in that you just got to show up, and a lot of it is just show up, do the best you can. It's not necessarily going to feel good, and you're trying to come from a loving place. There, as she became more confused at different times, there were some things that we basically had to, well, I don't like to use the word lie, but because she wasn't going to understand, we couldn't tell her what was really going on. We sort of had to make up these stories for her. And that was really hard for me. That was really hard for me to not be, and especially the final. So we moved her from out of her home. It wasn't a good situation for her to move in with us. So we moved her to like a facility that was independent and assisted. And she lived there for like a year and a half, fairly independent, with a lot of support from me coming in and out of there. As things began to decline, I had to get more and more involved, obviously day in and day out. And then there was a point where with that, the place she was living was saying this is not the place for her now. And we had to go and move her into a long-term facility. And I couldn't tell her. I mean, I had to. They don't recommend that you do that because they don't understand. A lot of times they think they're thinking at a 10-year-old level, let's say. And so I just sort of had to take her there and like, oh, mom, I'm okay, and bring her in. And they don't want you, because they know the family's emotional. So they kind of want to take it from there. So I had all her stuff. It was like dropping a kindergartner off the first day of school and then having to leave. And I just remember, I mean, I walked out just crying. It's like, how did we get here? How did we get it in this situation?
Yeah.
And it was just, that's where we were. And yeah, it was tough.
You're pulling at my heartstrings here. What do you think what you said, line, or not telling her the full story? and you kind of just shared maybe some of the things that made it so hard, the family being more emotional than the caregiving staff. And what do you think for you was the hardest part in that scenario or that circumstance for you?
First of all, not feeling like I was being on the up and up with her about what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
It was just going to upset her, though.
Mm-hmm.
And just the releasing of the control. I mean, I didn't, there was no control. There was no control over any of it. And it's not, I tend to be somebody who's not big on medical establishments anyway. So for me to have to get involved with a business organization like that is not something that I like anyway. And it just, I mean, I had to release it. I had to release it to Spirit and just say, Spirit, I'm trying to do the best I can here. And realizing that this was part of her journey too, her soul journey as well. And that I was a piece of it and playing my part, but there was something bigger at work here, and I could just do the best I could do.
That's beautiful. I like that perspective.
It was very helpful to keep that, I had to remind myself of that, but that's really where I went with it.
Mm-hmm. I think to get through, sometimes I feel like I can relate because my grandpa did have Alzheimer's, and my mom and her two sisters were caregivers for him through that time. Similar circumstance, started off in his home, but then couldn't be cared for no longer, and eventually moved into more of an independent assisted living center. And I think when you're in it, any kind of season of courage, caregiving for a parent, caregiving for your children, any kind of season, it feels like it's never going to end sometimes. So I think having a positive perspective or something that you can hold light or hold space for, that gives you the momentum to continue to move forward and to move through, is really helpful. And I think that is just a very beautiful perspective that you had, helping yourself through it and helping your mom through that period.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It does feel like it's not going to end, and you're just kind of going, all right, where are we going with this? How is this going to play out? And realizing that it's going to play out the way it plays out. One of the things that I knew, so she also had, what do they call it? The Lewy, she began to hallucinate, the Lewy bodies, I think. So that was super difficult. The last year or so, she was hallucinating, especially at, they call it the sundowner effect, which when the sun goes down, there's something that affects the circadian rhythm and the hallucinations and so on. And she was hallucinating all this kind of crazy stuff. And she was sort of a nervous person anyway. And she had always kind of, she never did well on medications or anything. They had tried different things. She never was somebody through the course of her life that did well. It always upset her stomach. And so she couldn't take a lot of that stuff, which is not my inclination anyway. And I also knew that, I felt intuitively that if she did start getting on those medications, that she was going to fall, because it would upset her equilibrium. And I used to weigh that out in my head. And I actually had a nurse who would come into one of those facilities, and she was really trying to pressure me to get her on some kind of med for her nerves. And I didn't say it out loud to the nurse because I didn't think she would understand, but I was weighing that. Okay, then she's going to fall. And as soon as she went into the 3 months later, when she went into the long-term memory care, they started playing with meds with her. And at that point, I lost control. I mean, I was like, okay, you guys, we got to do what we got to do here. And she fell. She fell about 3 months in, maybe not even that long. I think she was there about 8 weeks or so, maybe 10 weeks. And she fell and broke her wrist and her shoulder. And then, she was gone a week later. And so maybe it was all a blessing because she was just going to keep progressing. And but I knew it was the meds. I knew that that was going to make her dizzy. And she had a walker and all that. And she was up brushing her teeth. And sure enough, I got a phone call that she's fallen and she's in, so anyway.
That's difficult, especially knowing your mom, because she's your mom, and knowing probably what's best for her. Of anybody that's caregiving for her, you were still caregiving for her in a way, but
absolutely.
but not having that control of making those decisions. I feel like that would be even harder the more advanced she got and more into this the home that she moved into, where she needed more care, but you still being a caregiver for her, but having less of the control and the decisions and the daily, like you said, talk about letting go of control, but still having to be that caregiver and have that presence and hold that space for your mom. Probably was very challenging, because you probably felt, I would assume, defeated at times, frustrated.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure they're all the feelings that come along with it.
Yeah, it just but she became so upset emotionally with all these hallucinations and everything, and that I recognized that, yeah, we got to do something here to help her emotionally, but knowing that was going to come at a cost.
Do you think, it sounds like your children were already grown and out of so you weren't caregiving for both at the same time, but
No.
do you see a lot of similarities between caregiving for a parent and caregiving for children, or maybe top three? Because I'm in the season of early motherhood, so but I also do have aging parents, and my dad actually had a collapsed lung a few months ago, and they don't live close by. They live about 9 hours away. So it's just this whole dimension that kind of was not really on my radar before. Like, oh, I'm going to have to start caregiving for both ends of this, just with aging, but then also being an early newer mom. It was not a dimension that had entered my mind before, of caregiving for both ends of life. And I feel like there are similarities, but there are also, a lot of differences as well.
Yeah. They call that the sandwich generation, where you're sandwiched with kids and then with aging parents, or that sandwich time of your life, so to speak. It is, I think it's, the roles to me are, well, now with adult children, it's a little bit different because they have their own life. And once again, knowing when to step in, when to stay back and things. So in that way, yes. But with your parents, with kids, you're trying to raise them into their independence. And it's sort of a reversal with a parent a lot of times that is losing their independence. So it's almost like a rewind, and you're going, wait a minute here. We are rewinding the situation. So that's what I thought. I didn't really feel, as far as other aspects of that, I felt like the two situations were different. And that may just be because of the interaction between my mom and over time, over our life, my life and her life. And just, she had been, when my kids were younger, she had some surgeries that I had to help with. And so I had some of that, but then she would get better. But she went in and out of that several times, where I did have to take I was busy with the kids, my husband and I, and I did have to show up for those situations. So I'm very thankful that she stayed so independent till 90. I'm very, very thankful for that, because I did watch friends whose parents lost their independence much younger than that.
And that's hard too, because that's another sense of lack of control. I'm sure for parents, I saw, when my dad was in the hospital, he didn't have the control, and he didn't, he hated being the one that was being nurtured. cared for. He's kind of
Mhm.
a rough and tough guy. So I'm sure that's hard for them on their end too as well. But maybe with dementia or Alzheimer's, not having awareness around it as much as maybe somebody um, who doesn't have a memory loss dynamic
Yes.
involved is you're kind of just present, you're just there. With Alzheimer's, that's kind of the one thing from my experience being around somebody with Alzheimer's is having um it's more harder on the caregiver. It's more
Hmm.
hard on the caregiver than it is the patient themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. There were some aspects of our relationship that did get easier as the
Mhm.
dementia
Mm.
advanced because she was in some cases a lot easier about certain things. My dad had died when I was 8, so and I'm the youngest of 4.
Wow.
So she and I have I was the last one out of the house and all of that and so there had been this back and forth relationship with the two of us anyway. Just I think the
Hmm.
youngest a lot of times feels that with a parent or both parents when you're the last one out the door, so to speak. And and there were times that I felt resentment about that I had to take care of. And part of that was just I was putting it on myself. She wasn't necessarily putting it on me, but I felt that there was a caretaker role there. Way and this would have been way early on, and just that played out off and on throughout my adulthood.
Hmm. I can relate. I'm the youngest as well, so I can relate to. And I have a little bit different dynamic with my sisters are much older than I was. They were graduating high school and going into college when I was in my young childhood years. So I felt like kind of an only child, but also had siblings at the same time. So I was kind of left in the household for my entire childhood by myself.
Yes.
So
Yes.
um, yeah, I think that dynamic is, like you said, kind of that back and forth dynamic between you and your mom as your life has played out. And then, but maybe that, like you said, you're a small part of this journey, her journey she's on. And maybe that, whether you realize it or not, that back and forth role kind of played into the much bigger picture of being there for her and helping her through her final years of life.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. So true.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. Do you have any, I don't want to say like top three, but for you being in that season, do you have any three takeaways? Or sounds like community was really important to have around you. You had other friends with aging parents at the same time, your husband. Are there any top things that come to mind that you would recommend to somebody who's in this hard season of being a caregiver for an aging parent?
Great question. I would say that definitely having people around you that can be sounding boards and just listen to you process what's happening. Friends or even getting into support groups where
Mm.
people are going through the same thing and just realizing that you are not alone, because sometimes it feels like you've just been dealt a really difficult hand and you're all alone making these decisions, and there are tons of families that are going through similar situations. So I would say that's a big one. I didn't my her situation. I had a friend that was going, who I mentioned, that was had her mom's Alzheimer's was way more drawn out, went a lot longer,
Mhm.
and she ended up she would go and take classes and had support groups, and she really got a lot out of that. That was not something that I took advantage of, but my situation kind of moved a lot faster than hers. I
Mhm.
probably would have if it had kept going on.
What
The
was
other
the
thing, go ahead.
Sorry, how many years about total bookend?
Well, I would say that I would say the real intense part was only about well, she was only in the facility, the long-term facility, for 3 months, but it really, I started noticing it when she was about 90. She passed at 93. And then it was a slow movement in where I began to realize, wow, okay, it really is happening. I'm not just imagining this. And some people's Alzheimer's or dementia moves much quicker than that. And she had still, when she passed, she did still have some faculties about her. She was, I think, what they would call, like, there's higher care and lower care, or they don't know, I forget what they call it, but more advanced care, and basically different levels of intensity of those illnesses. The other thing I would say is to not be afraid to speak up to doctors or nurses or other people when you feel like you disagree with what they are recommending. I would say that that is a big one, and being their advocate, and really, because there's a lot of folks in those places that don't have people advocating for them. And sometimes, they get taken advantage of, consciously or unconsciously.
Right. And I think, like you touched on, I think being an advocate, like you said, your mom best. They're just, the medical staff and the caregivers on site, they're doing their job, but they don't know this person like you do. So I think being the advocate especially for people with Alzheimer's and dementia who don't really have a voice because they don't really know they don't have that conscious awareness of what's going on. So I think that's wonderful. And yeah, if you disagree, I think that takes courage in itself, because sometimes you can get in your own head and be like, who am I to tell a doctor my opinion about this, whatever. But like you said, it was kind of innate in you. You knew that those medicines were going to give your mom, kind of put her equilibrium off, and that's kind of what happened. So to trust in your gut and to be an advocate, I think is very great sound advice.
Yes. Yes. And the other thing I would say would be follow your intuition, and which is really what you were just saying there. And that's a big one for me anyway. And really listening to that, because it is so important in the decision making there. Because there's so much an emotion tied up with everybody involved. Sometimes it can be hard to sort through that. So taking some of that time and taking care of yourself as much as you can, because it's stressful. It takes up a lot of time. If you have other things going on, you are just running. And having those moments or those days, or not being afraid to get out of town for a little bit, and not feeling guilty about it, or that afternoon, or however it works out in your schedule, that is so critical in a situation like this too. And then the other piece I would say is to get with somebody that, look at your finances, kind of see where you're at, and kind of lay it out and look at where do you think you're going with this? Because is this going to be a 5-year thing? Is this going to be a 10-year drawn out thing? Is this going to be 1 year? There's a lot of things we don't know, but there are some financial questions that you might ask that could be helpful along the way. So having some of that power of attorney, some of those things in place can be really good too.
Absolutely. And I think that's something, when you're in a season like this, not expecting it, or like you said, kind of in denial, or I think finances and legal counsel, and like you said, power of attorney, those things kind of get, when you're to prepare for that as much ahead of time or in the early stages, I think is very important, because when you're in it, you're just in survival mode. You're not going to want to think about that or have time to think about that. it's not on the forefront of your mind. So
Yeah.
I think having the awareness around it, or just some kind of, like I said, legal counselor, intuitive approach about what the plan is, I think is very healthy and very beneficial in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for all. That's all very sound advice. I do resonate with that.
The other thing that's coming to just popped in my mind as I'm thinking back on that situation is, and you, I had heard people say this, but when you're in the situation with somebody who has dementia or Alzheimer's, and they're just telling you, they're telling you something that is in their own fantasy,
Mm.
or they don't remember something, and not pointing it out, just kind of going along with them, not saying, well, remember, don't you remember this, remember the, and because it can sound helpful, like you're trying to help them remember, but what you're pointing out, they already know that they're having trouble, and so you're sort of just pointing out a glaring thing that is not going to help them with their confidence.
Mm.
And that was something I had to learn along the way, was just go along with what is being said as much as you can.
How much of, since you said that, I think that's so true, because I see a lot of um I guess emotions come up with a caregiver of dementia or Alzheimer's family member, patience, lack of, or frustration, or how much of do you think the ego kind of plays for the caregiver? Because I mean, it does take a lot of patience, but I mean, because we're so conscious about what's going on, but like you said, they're kind of just in this fantasy world or fantasy land in their head. And if you point something out or try and correct them, it's going to bring their confidence level down, or make them feel kind of insecure in that moment, or experience some of those feelings of vulnerability or frustration or sadness. Just some things that are kind of coming to mind. Do you think, since you've been the caregiver, and it sounds like you like you said, you learned that along the way, but do you think your ego kind of got checks and balances a little bit?
Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
there were days where I wasn't as patient, and I
Mhm.
mean, all of that, and the guilt that comes with that. And so, yes, your ego gets in there sometimes, even though you're trying your best, and you
Mhm.
have these patterns of interaction that have been going on for decades. And so some of that has to be broken up. And here you are in the middle of this really stressful situation. And sometimes we resort back to something that might be unhealthy for both people or just one. So and I still think about, I mean, I feel overall, my husband will say to me, you did it. Cause I'll say, do you think I did, especially right after she passed, do you think I did a good job?
Mhm.
He goes, yes, you did a great job. And so that has kind of faded, but every once in a while I still like think, oh, I could have been a little more patient. I could
Mhm.
on this particular day, or I could have been a little more present, because you realize those moments are just so precious and they're fleeting. And so it is what it is. I mean, I've just sort of made peace with that. And when I do start to go down that road, I just say, I did the best I could. I did the best I
Mhm.
could under the circumstances. But it's sort of one of those, you get the long view. Like, I can talk about it now, it's 5 or so years, and I've got a longer view. And in looking back on it, it doesn't seem like it went on that long. But at the time, as you mentioned, you feel like this is going on forever, and it's disrupting the rest of your life.
Mhm.
And there is some resentment that comes up with that, like, why is this all falling on me, and this is really disrupting my life, because I want to be off doing this other thing. And just but realizing that it's sacred ground, that what is going on in this particular situation or case is sacred ground, and you're to be, and how, what an honor it is to be able to help somebody at the end of their life.
Mhm.
or maybe even be able to usher them out as well, she had a beautiful passing. We were all there, and it yeah, so the way it all wrapped up with a little bow on top, so to speak, I was very satisfied and happy about the way she went out.
Good. And not suffering anymore with
Right. Right.
falls, broken hips, memory. I mean, she's
Yeah.
no longer suffering. And that's something I think um Earthside, whatever, everybody believes in is we're the ones that how we grieve and how I feel like they're the ones that are lifted of peace and lifted of no more suffering, and we're the ones suffering here on
Yeah.
earth. But
Yeah.
that's just helps me at least put my mind at ease, when in the grieving process of losing somebody, is they're in the better place, we're here on earth suffering. So
Yeah. I mean, um, it's very true. And just, oh, I had a thought. I lost it. I had some other point I was going to make around that, but it's, I mean, once again, we're all just trying to walk each other home and do what we can and just show up. Showing up is so much a part of life. Showing up when you're called.
yes, I love that. And I think that's sometimes we overthink it. I think we overthink showing up. I think we make it harder than it needs to be, or we're worried about how we're going to be perceived, or think about executing something correctly, or like you said to your husband, did I do a good enough job? But just showing up, sometimes that's all you need to do. And we can maybe sometimes get in our own heads and overthink that as well. So I
Yeah.
do love that.
And when I think about her now, I mean, it's funny, a lot of that falls away. And I know that she's with me, and I know that I feel this sense of you did okay. You did
Mhm.
okay. And I know it wasn't, her kind of saying, I know it wasn't easy.
Mhm.
Um, so, but it's very, I keep telling, I have a girlfriend of mine whose mom is almost 100. And her mom's pretty healthy. Her mom's still living somewhat independently, and they have kind of a interesting dynamic back and forth. And I just keep telling her, because they can push each other's buttons pretty easily.
Mhm.
And I just, even all these years later, because she's in her mid 70s and now she's got her mom, and it's still the dynamic.
Set in
It
their own
doesn't.
ways.
Yeah, I mean, some of that stuff doesn't go away. And I just keep telling her it's sacred ground, and it's what a place to be able to practice who you want to be in this moment.
Mm, that's
Those family
beautiful.
relationships are sacred ground.
I love that. That's very beautiful. Something you said earlier was that kind of, again, I'm in the early seasons of motherhood, so it just is very parallel of, like you said, I could have showed up more present in that day or more patient in that day. And I think it just correlates again too. So those are great reminders for me, not just in the season I am in, but as, one with aging parents as well, practicing and how I want to show up, and like you said, practice who you want to show up as.
Yeah. And that means taking care of ourselves and giving ourselves space to breathe and not trying to be all things to all people.
Mm, that's easier said than done sometimes too.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I was just thinking that as it came out of my mouth, because sometimes we're just, there's a zillion things happening all at once, and we don't
Yes.
have a chance sometimes to take a breath.
And I think that's something that we touched on maybe before I hit record. Unfortunately, I need to just start hitting record right as I get on the call, because I think some of that juicy stuff right in the beginning is lost, because it's not lost, but it's just not here on the record. But I think we get so caught up in the day to day, and even in those harder seasons of
Yeah.
courage. that, like you said, kind of more survival mode, but just to make that practice for yourself, whether whatever time you have, or to make time to go to a yoga class, or just sit in your silence for 5 minutes, or read a book, or doesn't have to be extraordinary, just a walk or anything, just to make that time, because I think that builds that foundation of the person that you want to be, and helps give you that awareness around wanting to be more present or patient, or give you those stronger characteristics, or help build those characteristics.
Right. And when we do that and show up for ourselves like that, and I call that keeping promises to yourself. When we say things like, boy, I really want to have more patience today, or I really want to be more present. And we do our best, and we have that intention. And that's a practice. And when we keep doing it, we're keeping those promises to ourselves, and we start to be able to trust ourselves better in challenging situations, because we can point to those times when we did carry through.
Yeah. I think that, like you said, that in the beginning, I think all of us have experienced moments or seasons of courage, and several of them at that. And so I think in keeping promises to ourselves and helping us trust more in ourselves, again, it builds that courage muscle, or it builds that, like, I've been through something hard before, I know I can get through this time, or the next time,
Yes.
or whatever that looks like. It might not even look the same. It might be completely different, but building that trust muscle with ourselves, and giving us the confidence to get through the next hard thing is very helpful.
There's huge benefit in that. Huge.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, well, thank you, Leslie, so much. This has been such a wonderful conversation, and I again enjoy getting to know you a little bit better, and talking to you, and hearing about one of many seasons of courage. I like to ask a question at the end of every this conversation is hindsight 2020. Looking back, what would you have told your old self, knowing what you know now, before stepping into that season of courage?
Yes, great question. It's going to be okay. You're going to figure it out. You're going to do the best you can. And in this case with my mom, she loves and adores you. So just show up, and it's all going to work out, and you'll have plenty of support, and you will survive it.
I love that. You will survive. She loves you. You're enough. Be okay. It's all great. And everything else that you shared throughout this conversation has been helpful and very insightful too.
I'm so glad.
Thank you again. And if you could maybe share where listeners could connect with you. I know you mentioned your podcast, maybe, and I can include all this in the show notes, and any other way to contact you.
Yeah. Well, you can find me on any of the podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, all of that. It's Meaning and Moxie After 50. And I also have a website, meaningandmoxieafter50.com. So that's really the easiest way to get in touch with me. And I also have a Gmail. If you go, you know how you start searching on social media, and you can find the link trees and so on, that my Gmail is on there as well. So that's where to find me.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Leslie. I will be sure to include that in the show notes as well. So thank you again, and have a great day.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Yes.
Thank you for joining me and listening to the Kindred Journey Podcast. If this episode resonated with you, please consider taking the time to rate and review the podcast, and share this episode with family and friends who you think might enjoy it. Your positive feedback helps me reach more courageous women like you. This is my passion project, so without you, I wouldn't be here doing this, and I deeply appreciate your support. Until next time.